So coming back to you moving house, was that, did you enjoy moving house or did you prefer your old house?
Oh no, I was happy to come because it was by the river, and it was quite obvious that my dad was in his element, you know, because when we'd lived away from here early in my life, always, well, mostly weekends, we'd come down and look at the river, and he'd walk me along to Hammerton's ferry to talk to his uncle and things like that. And it was where he wanted to be. It was his life.
And where was your old house?
We lived, I think we moved 4 or 5 times before this. We didn't have a house of our own. In fact, I only started to buy this house in 1976. It was rent. No money. Always I lived in Twickenham. We'd lived up near Twickenham Green and Gothic Road, and then somewhere near Hospital Bridge Road, and then eventually back here. Yeah.
So, about your family history, could you tell us a bit more about your family and the history?
Yeah, I've got family trees, as I say, going back forever. And in fact, one distant member of our family reckons that we go back to the Norman French, which doesn't please me because I want to be an Anglo-Saxon. Way back, but my other cousin says that's rubbish. You know, you can prove anything. But certainly in this area, I do know 400 years, and they've all gone to St Mary's School and St Mary's Church, except me, because I went to St James's School.
And in those 400 years, what were the main jobs that?
They would have all worked on the water, all of them.
All of them.
Yeah, all of them, without exception, as far as I can see.
And some of the jobs, for example, what could they be?
What else could they be?
Yeah, the jobs they'd done on the river, apart from watermen.
They would be on the barges, unloading and loading. There weren't many of them up at the docks in London. They were mostly around here, although lots of them, I think, another section was at Kingston. I don't know of any other areas down here. I have seen pictures of a C. Hammerton at Hampton Court, and he had a boathouse, but it would be letting out boats, mending boats, building boats. I mean, my grandfather and my great-grandfather had a business on Ypres Island and a boathouse, and my great-grandfather got into trouble with it. It wasn't paying, which is when my grandfather would have been gone into the war, and my great-uncle Walter started the business down at Marble Hill because the railways were bringing people out and there was more trade, and he ferried back and forth. And there is a book about his fight with the Earl of Dysart to win the right to that ferry, which he's won in perpetuity. And that case went to the House of Lords, and he won.
Oh, really?
He won the first case, and the Earl and his people appealed against it. He lost the second. He sold his house, because he did own a house, moved on to the boathouse, which was much grander than that barge it is now. It looked like that. It was rather elegant. And lived on there, and as he wrote, they wore old for new, because they'd got no money left. But there were 2 Labour peers who supported his case and said he should take it again to the House of Lords. There were also subscription concerts round in Twickenham because it became a national case. He was in the national papers, this man fighting for the rights of the common man, and he won. And there was a regatta, and there's a ferry song, and it was all a great thing because he'd won it, you know. Wonderful.
And is your second name Hammerton, or why, if it's not, why is the boat company called Hammerton?
Well, this is my great-uncle's thing. It will always be Hammerton's because it was his ferry.
Oh.
So whoever now owns it, it's Hammerton's ferry throughout history.
So that's not your surname?
Oh, it is my surname.
Oh.
I've never been married, yeah. I understand there were lots of Hammerton women, so I'm told, who didn't marry after the Great War because everybody died.
Was it just your family who worked in the company, or was it other people as well?
I'm sure they employed others, and in fact I know, was it a Moffat did my great uncle employ, but mostly it would be your own kin, because there wouldn't be that much work to pay other people, you see. I mean, in those days you didn't have all the possessions you had now, which I suppose is how my granny was able to have 9 children. Do you know where the museum is? Down here in 23, the embankment.
Yeah.
Well, 13 Hammertons lived in there. They were kind of second cousins to my father's family. And somebody who went to visit it said, how did you sleep 13 children? Where did they sleep? And someone who was a member of the family said they slept where they could. You didn't all have a bed and sheets and blankets. And you were lucky to have boots to go to church in, you know. It was a very different world.
Did you live near the town, or were you mostly by the river?
What, before we came here?
Yeah.
In the town, but not sort of down here at the junction. Yeah.
I suppose Hammerton will always be like a trademark, and your name will go down in history.
Oh, I hope so, yes.
And then, do you like that your name will always be remembered?
I love it. I'm so proud of them when I think of so many of them that have worked and drowned on the river, because I've got a list of watermen which was given to me by someone who worked up at Waterman's Hall, and lots of them, or some of them didn't finish their apprenticeship. And I was wondering about this, and then I thought, well, of course, lots of them drowned. It was a very dangerous job, you know. And we're talking about steamers, and now steamers are all fenced in at the side. Well, you just had railings. It was none of this health and safety business. And you can imagine on the icy top of a barge in the semi-dark with one big oar across the back. Bit dangerous.
Why do you think people, including your family, decided to work like that if they knew?
It was all they knew, it was all there was. You've got to work somewhere. You were either going to be in service, and I don't suppose they were refined enough to be in service.
Do you remember, or do you know of the first person that started Hammertons and Co?
Hammerton and Co was Uncle Walter, great Uncle Walter. I know that Henry Isaac, great-great-grandfather, had this boathouse on the island, and Henry Isaac, his son, used to have boats outside the White Swan. At the back of the White Swan there's a big piece of land, and boats used to be up there, and they used to be boat builders even then. And when I was a little girl, I remember coming down with Daddy before we lived here, and outside the White Swan they'd be letting out boats, and on the side of the wall of that's now a private garden were boxes, and that's where they keep the boat's cushions. And that's all gone now, of course.
So when you were younger, you said your dad introduced you to someone when you were only 15. Did you end up...
Oh no, that was my great uncle when my dad had died. No, it was funny because he was in the boys' brigade. I think he was older than me. He must have been all of 17. And I was invited to stay at his parents' house because they were going to a dance, that was right. But then when we came home, he went away to a camp and he wrote me a love letter, and I was terrified because I wasn't like that. So I didn't see him anymore.
Did you settle down with anyone else? Or?
No, I've never been married or engaged. I've had a lot of boyfriends, but I did a lot of amateur drama, which keeps you out of mischief, keeps you busy. You're always thinking, learning the next play and doing something else. Yeah.
Could you tell us a bit about War on the River?
Oh yeah, I can tell you about Dunkirk. Do you want to know about that? Yeah, I can remember that I was in bed and my mum came up and got me up. She said, come on, put on your raincoat over your pyjamas, we're going down to the river. And of course in the wartime it was always double summertime, so in the summer it never really got very dark. And I said, what's it for? And she said, come down, you will see. And of course, there were no lights anywhere in the war, you know, no street lights. Well,
Really?
the bombers would have seen where to come.
Oh, so you couldn't see anything?
We could see dimly. And, I mean, if you had a torch, it had to be shielded, down like that. But no lights, black curtains everywhere. Oh, yeah, it was pretty grim. In fact, the windows had to be stuck with tape so that the grass didn't crack and come in on you. Anyway, so we went down and looked, and there were some of my neighbours there, all very quiet, because it was solemn. And then down this side of the island, and it doesn't happen now because they don't dredge it outside where the boats are done. They used to dredge it and make a deeper channel. Came a few boats, and my dad was on the Tigris, which was Tough Brothers' tug at the front, with just one tiny leading light. And behind came a lot of big boats. And I said, what is it? And she said, they're going over, the boats are going to Dunkirk. And my dad took his up to Sheerness and was moored up behind a destroyer all night. And he was very sick, he said, because it was a little tug this all the time. But he wasn't sent over because he was working on the boats. And he came back with a big paper thing full of shrimps, which was lovely because in the war you didn't have much to eat. So we ate the shrimps, and all those boats went over to Dunkirk to rescue the men.
So how was it like being in the war? And because what I just heard about the Black Iron, you couldn't, no street lights, no nothing.
Oh, no, you couldn't. And when our house was bombed, it was when the flying bombs, doodlebugs, had really just started, June 1944. We were under a Morrison shelter out here, which was a big steel thing. And you've seen those, have you?
Yeah.
You slept underneath that all night, and you could hear them coming. And what happened is the engine would go, and there was silence. And it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, and whoosh! Anyway, my father said I wasn't to go to school, and he'd got to go to work. So he went off on his bike. I went up and lay on my bed. I remember him saying, bye, Freed, bye, Freed. And I hope I answered him, because it's the last time I ever spoke to him. And off he went, and my mother went and lay on the couch in the front room. And I suppose she can't have been there very long before there was a whoosh. And our ceilings came down, and the windows came out. Got up, walked along the landing over the rubble. And my mother said, I'm going down to the pub to phone to tell your dad that we're all right. Because he would have ridden his bike along up to Tufts at Teddington. And she rang, and they said, he's not here yet. And she said, well, that's funny. Anyway, she came back in here, and suddenly she flew out, because she knew, you know how you know things. And I rushed after her. And at where I showed you, at the foot of Water Lane, that was all bombed. And I can remember the smell of dust. Everything was grey and dust. And my mother was down there, my father was lying there with his head on one side, looking perfectly all right except for his neck. And an ARP was just going up to my mother and saying, there, dear, there's nothing you can do. And he was killed. And he was 36, like his dad was killed at 36 in the First World War. And that changed our lives completely, and changed the embankment completely. And my friend Angela, who lived in the flats, which I showed you the picture of, here, her brother was doing his paper round, and he had seen where they'd gone in the bombing, because that was all rubble, and he told the people where to dig for them and got them out. They were not killed, but down here, Catherine, I think she was 18, and her mother were killed, and over here, a lady and her little boy were killed, and up here, Mr. and Mrs. Lee, they'd had the boathouse before my dad had, they were killed, and a lot of other people. And it changed it completely. All this was just rubble. Yeah. So that's what changed the embankment.
Did you move because of all the bombing, or did you stay where you were?
No, my mother wouldn't let me be evacuated. No, we couldn't go anywhere. We had nowhere to go. No money to go anywhere.
Why couldn't you be evacuated?
My mother wouldn't let me go. She wanted me to stay here with her, which you can understand. I don't think I wanted to go away.
And do you still have the Morrison shelter here?
No, it's gone now. Got a proper kitchen, a modern kitchen. Yeah.
And do you remember the sound of the sirens?
Oh yeah, and the all clear, yeah. Yeah.
Did it affect the river or the bubble because of pollution?
Well, I don't know. I don't suppose anybody thought of pollution then. In fact, it rather makes me laugh when you have all this about having, what is it, tanks at the side to... You all went in the river. I learned to swim in the river and I'm still alive. Yeah, I learned at the steps down at the bottom, because when I could swim from here over to the island and back, I could have a dinghy. That was right. Yeah. I tell you what I do remember about the war. Are you interested in the war?
Yeah.
The rationing. Because my mother, of course, had to work. Everybody had to work. So I had to get the rations for her sometimes. And the cheese ration was about that big for the week. I love cheese. I remember very wickedly taking a little bit off the cheese once and eating it and feeling terribly guilty. Yeah, but we lived. Yeah.
So when do you think, do you think that, well, the war changed being the olden days and being like the new age, modern?
It changed so many things. I think the men that came back from the war wanted things to be different. In fact, I went to work in the health service when I was, 23, and most of those doctors had come back from the war. They were all socialists and passionately believed in the health service, which, believe me, you two, is the best thing that ever happened to this country.
What is the health service?
NHS, where you can go to be treated free.
Yeah.
Because when I was a child, and I was often ill, evidently, it was 5 shillings on the mantelpiece for the doctor. And if you hadn't got it, you didn't have the doctor.
How much was 5 shillings in our days now?
Well, you think of if you earn £3 a week, 5 shillings is £0.25. Yeah, it's a lot of money, isn't it? That's the best thing. You must always defend the health service.
So, back to the river, sorry, when the bombs were going off, did anyone, like the barges, did they ever get hit by the bombs?
I don't remember barges being hit, but then I suppose they must have been, certainly at the docks. I can remember, yes. When my dad was still alive, Tough Brothers had a dance on Eel Pie Island because that hotel was still going. And I can remember my mother took me up to a shop and coupons were spent to buy me a frock. And she wanted me to have a frock with a white collar and blue and white. And I wanted a silky one. I got it in the end. And so my mum and dad were having a dance and fun. And there was a petty officer playing the piano, which I thought was lovely, and my father was keeping an eye on me. Keep away. But when we came, and there was no bridge, you ferried yourself across. We rowed back and sat on here there was a wall you could sit on, which stopped the water going into the boat arch. And we listened, and you could hear bombing. And as we got up and walked back towards our house, there was big red in the sky, quite some distance away. And I said, "What was that?" And it was the docks being bombed, London. Yeah.
Or was it red?
Well, it's the fire. Smoke and the fire. All this way down you could see it. Yeah, it was awful. I don't know how lots of people up there lived through it. In fact, a lady I used to work with, she worked in London in the war, and she said that you would go to work and you'd be walking across bodies.
So, sorry, back to barges and things. If they were bringing food over...
Not food, no. It was, well, they were up in London,
Yeah.
but down here it was wood and coal. I think sometimes they may have had grain. I think they may have done, but mostly it was wood and coal to my knowledge, yeah. But when we first moved here, what they now call the Sculpture Park is Champion's Wharf. And Champion was an importer of stuff, and that's where the grain comes in, I can remember that. The barges would come up there, it was a big building, and at the back, a chute, the stuff would come down into carts to go away with horses. I do remember that. But that all stopped before the war. I'm not quite sure why. Yeah, I can't think why that was.
And did you use the river for transport, you personally, or did you get around by foot or?
No, I didn't know. Because oddly enough, no, it was all for pleasure. People didn't sort of have boats and go to work on them. No, it was all for pleasure.
If you didn't have cars, how did you get around?
On a bus or on foot. Yeah, on the train. Puff puffs. Yeah.
But what, for example, say you wanted to get somewhere that was on the other side of the river.
Yeah, ferried over. Ferry.
Wasn't that a bit long and like, not boring, but say you just wanted to meet a friend and they lived on the other side, you had to get a bus, then ferry. Is it a bit long?
Yeah. But life was perhaps a bit slower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay guys, let's just pause it.